Rolls-Royce produces some of the most luxurious cars in the world, but it's ironic to think that this billion-dollar company began with the humblest of beginnings. It all started with a poor boy who sold newspapers on the streets just so he could afford to eat. Despite his lack of education, he became a skilled engineer, and, with just 20 pounds to his name, built a million-dollar company selling electrical machinery. But his life would change dramatically when he purchased his first vehicle, whose performance didn't meet his expectations of perfection, so he decided to build one of his own. Within a matter of years, his newly built cars were among the most reliable, quiet, and powerful on the market, eventually transforming his company into one of the most elegant and desired car brands in the industry. This is the remarkable story of Rolls-Royce, and how a poor boy created some of the most expensive cars in the world. Henry Royce. Henry Royce was born in a small village called Alwalton in England on March 27, 1863. As the youngest of 5 children, Henry grew up in a poor family that struggled to sustain a flour mill business. By 1867, that business went bankrupt. This forced the Royce family to relocate to London, where Henry's father found work at another flour mill. Unfortunately, the pay wasn't enough to get by, and at just 4 years old, Henry began his first job scaring birds in a cornfield to help provide for his family. Unfortunately, things became worse. When Henry turned 9, his father passed away, meaning Henry was thrust into working 2 jobs just so he could afford to eat, selling newspapers in the morning and delivering telegrams at night. But no matter how hard he worked, it still wasn't enough. Eventually, the family's dire situation prompted his mother to send him to live with an elderly couple, hoping that her son could have a better life. But life there was just as bleak. Most nights, Henry's only meal was bread soaked in milk, and by the time he was 14, he had only managed to complete 2 years of formal education. One day, his aunt came to visit and was deeply impressed by Henry's resilience and work ethic. She believed he deserved more than a life of hardship. So, she scraped some money together and enrolled him in an apprenticeship program with the Great Northern Railway Company in Peterborough. It was there that Henry found his true calling, mechanical engineering, and would regularly spend most of his time studying and practicing with tools during night after class. Even while selling newspapers, he became a skilled mechanic, learning everything he could with thoroughness and great precision. Unfortunately, the money his aunt provided only lasted 3 years, and so Henry was forced to drop out of his apprenticeship program. Nevertheless, with his new skills and knowledge, he was hired at the Electric Light and Power Company in London. At his new job, Henry worked tirelessly, often skipping meals to tinker with electronic components, and by the time he was 18, he had saved enough money to enroll in night classes for electrical engineering. His strong work ethic finally paid off in 1882 when Henry was promoted to chief electrician for the Maxim Western Electric Company at just 19 years old. For a boy who had struggled so much through poverty, this was a remarkable achievement, and Henry felt that he had finally made it in life. However, fate had other plans. Less than 3 years later, the company went bankrupt, and Henry's life was once again plunged into uncertainty. But this time, Henry wasn't going to let anyone dictate his life again. At 21, he was determined to build his own future, and the best way to do so was by creating his own electrical machinery company. The only problem was that he only had 20 pounds to his name, so how was he going to do it? With the little money he had, Henry approached his friend and fellow engineer, Ernest Claremont, to go into partnership. Leaving his job to start a company from scratch was a huge risk for Ernest, but he believed in Henry's skills and relentless drive. So he borrowed 50 pounds from his father, and together they launched F.H. Royce & Company in 1884. With their limited budget, their beginnings were bound to be humble. They rented a small workshop in Manchester where they lived in a tiny room upstairs, sleeping and eating in hammocks. Sandwiches and sausages became their daily staple for nearly a year as they built their business, which Ernest later blamed for the digestive issues that plagued them years later. Despite the hardships, Henry worked endlessly, designing and building electrical fittings that were better than anything else on the market. And it wasn't long before he achieved their first breakthrough in 1885, the electric doorbell. These electric doorbells quickly became a huge seller, and within years, Henry was now designing more complex products like motors, dynamos, and electrical cranes. Their reputation for quality and precision made the company successful throughout the 1890s, and by the year 1900, they employed over 100 workers and had annual revenues exceeding £20,000, the equivalent to several million today. But while Henry enjoyed its newfound success, it was also during this period that large American corporations like Westinghouse and General Electric were beginning to enter the British market, causing prices for electronics to fall dramatically. Soon, many British engineering firms began to struggle, including Royce's company. As profits dwindled, Henry's physical and mental health also began to deteriorate under the stress of his business, so much that he decided to seek a doctor. The doctor gave him a simple and straightforward advice: get some fresh air and rest. He was even suggested to buy a car so that he could travel more easily from his factory to his home. Following that advice, Henry bought a used Dion-Bouton quadricycle. However, the vehicle was a complete disappointment. It was essentially two bicycles side by side, powered by a single-cylinder engine. It was clumsy, hard to start, and had very poor brakes. At the time, automobiles were still crude, handmade machines with many design flaws, and most people didn't view them as practical transportation, but rather as a toy for the rich, as they were very expensive and often unreliable. Despite these flaws, Henry became fascinated with cars, and while taking a break from his company to recover, he dedicated himself to learn automotive mechanics. What began as a medical advice quickly became a true obsession for Henry, and soon, a new business idea began to take shape. What if, instead of selling electrical machines, they built and sold automobiles? In the early 20th century, most people considered cars to be useless. But Henry was one of the very few who developed a passion for them. So, upon returning from his break, he made sure to purchase one of the best vehicles he could find, a two-cylinder Decauville. Nonetheless, even this well-respected car wasn't up to the standards of Mr. Henry Royce. It was too noisy, the brakes were inefficient, and the engine had overheating problems. In fact, when Henry went to pick up the car, it couldn't even start. Seeing these problems, Henry decided to fix it himself and soon began improving the car in every way he could. Eventually, by building the car up to his own standards, he ended up redesigning the entire vehicle. The result was a car far better than the original Decauville. It was then that Henry decided, rather than improving cars, he should build his own and start selling them in the growing automobile market. So, he gathered a small team in his workshop and began building his first prototype. Using another Decauville as the basis for his design, Henry dismantled the entire vehicle and meticulously studied every component, with the goal of improving or replacing each one with his own designs. It also helped that Henry knew electrical engineering and applied many aspects of that technology into his prototype. By 1904, Henry finally completed his first car, which he named the Royce 10. The Royce 10 was a marvel of engineering. It was quieter, lighter, more reliable, and smoother to drive than any other car at the time. Seeing the efficiency of his design, Henry built two more prototypes based on the same model, giving one to his business partner Ernest and selling the other to one of their shareholders, Henry Edmunds. Edmunds loved the car so much that he drove it around town, boasting to everyone that he'd bought it from the best car maker in England. His claims eventually caught the attention of one of the most popular car dealers in England and the second protagonist of the Rolls-Royce story, Charles Rolls. Charles Rolls was born in 1877 into a privileged family in London, as the youngest son of the Lord and Lady Languedoc. Unlike Royce, Charles had everything handed to him: money, connections, and opportunities. But while this posh upbringing should have afforded him an easy life, Charles Rolls preferred to tinker with engines, earning him the nickname Dirty Rolls among his friends. His fascinations for machines led him to study mechanical engineering and applied science at the prestigious Cambridge University. At age 18, he traveled to France to purchase his first automobile in 1896, a Peugeot Phaeton, becoming the first car brought to Cambridge and among the first three owned in the country of Wales. Charles Rolls soon became passionate about motor racing, even participating and winning the 1,000-mile reliability trial between London and Edinburgh in 1900. Although motor racing was extremely dangerous, even more so in its early days, it never deterred Charles from continue participating. In fact, he thrived on chaos, and it wasn't just for the adrenaline rush. Charles wanted to show the world what automobiles could do. Still, he was frustrated that most people in Britain had to travel abroad to purchase their cars. So, using funds from his father, he partnered with a friend named Claude Johnson and opened one of the first car dealerships in Britain in 1902, C.S. Rolls & Co. The dealership specialized in importing French and Belgian luxury vehicles, such as Peugeot and Minerva, to England, which Charles sold to a growing number of wealthy car enthusiasts. His charisma and business acumen proved to be successful, and by 1903, C.S. Rolls was booming, allowing Charles to open more dealerships across the country. Yet, Rolls was discontent with selling only foreign vehicles. Britain still didn't have a well-established car manufacturer, so Charles always yearned to find a reliable British car maker to partner with. That's when his friend, Henry Edmunds, told him about the Royce 10 he had recently bought. While Edmunds enthusiastically praised the car's reliability and quietness, Charles immediately tuned out when he learned it had a 2-cylinder engine. To him, 2-cylinder cars were vastly inferior to the 3- and 4-cylinder models he sold. So, during the next weeks, he avoided Edmunds, but Edmunds remained adamant, urging his friend to meet Henry Royce. Eventually, he convinced Henry to let the Royce 10 be tested at an automobile club event that he knew Charles would be attending. When the day of the event arrived, Henry's car stood in stark contrast to the noisy, unreliable cars that dominated the market. Charles couldn't ignore the car any longer. He reached out to Edmunds, who quickly arranged a meeting with Henry Royce in Manchester. During the meeting, Henry handed Charles the keys to the Royce 10, inviting him for a test drive. By the end of the ride, Charles was utterly convinced. The car's smooth engine and precise craftsmanship left an undeniable impression. That same night, he drove the car back to London and woke his business partner to declare, "I've just found the greatest motor engineer in the world." In December 1904, the partnership between Henry and Charles became official, and the Rolls-Royce venture was finally born. Despite their stark backgrounds, the collaboration between the two was a perfect balance of skill and ambition. Henry focused on engineering and design, while Charles leveraged his charm, social connections, and unrelenting passion for automobiles to build the company's reputation and attract elite clients. Soon, they unveiled 4 models at the Paris Motor Show, named according to their horsepower ratings, priced between £395 and £890, which is the equivalent of around $80,000 to $180,000 today. Despite the high price tags, it was immediately clear that these cars were special. Rolls-Royce's smooth performance, quietness, and dependability stood out from competitors that were noisy, temperamental, and prone to breaking down. Soon, orders poured in, and Rolls was selling as many cars as Royce was able to build. To promote its cars, Rolls-Royce entered prestigious racing events like the Isle of Man TT, where they won in 1906 and even broke new speed records in the process. These victories cemented Rolls-Royce as a premium brand, bringing greater demand to its cars. But it wasn't until the release of the Silver Ghost in 1907 that the company truly solidified itself as the pinnacle of automotive reliability. Its 7-liter, 6-cylinder engine featured pressurized lubrication, dual ignition, and advanced carburation, resulting in remarkably smooth power delivery. Claude Johnson, now marketer and managing director of Rolls-Royce, even pulled off a publicity stunt to demonstrate how smooth the car was, by placing a glass water on the running engine without spilling a drop. Even more impressively, Claude took the Silver Ghost to a highly publicized endurance test, where the car was driven for 15,000 miles non-stop, driving day and night for 2.5 months except for Sundays, without experiencing any mechanical failure. This feat prompted one journalist to declare it the best car in the world, a claim Rolls-Royce readily adopted. The Silver Ghost soon became the preferred vehicle for kings, queens, and industry leaders. Wealthy people from all over the world lined up to get their hands on the car, and by the end of its production run in 1927, nearly 7,900 Silver Ghosts had been built and sold. Sadly, Charles Royce wasn't there to see the company's growing success. Alongside his love of cars, Charles was also deeply passionate about aviation and eventually resigned as technical director to pursue flying full-time. He even urged Henry to design an aircraft engine for him, but Henry declined, focusing solely on cars. Still, Charles went on to become the second person in Great Britain to obtain a pilot license and soon brought a Wright Flyer, with which he made over 200 flights. In 1910, he became the first person to complete a non-stop flight across the English Channel and back, an iconic feat that made him a national hero. But his fame was short-lived. 1 month later, during an airshow in Bournemouth, the tail of his Wright Flyer broke off mid-air. The aircraft plummeted, and at just 33 years old, Charles Royce sadly became the first Briton to die in a plane crash. His death cast a long shadow over Rolls-Royce, especially in Henry, who deeply mourned the loss of his close friend. Meanwhile, Claude Johnson grew increasingly anxious. Not only had he lost a partner, but Henry's health was also deteriorating rapidly, and if something wasn't done soon, Rolls-Royce might lose its genius engineer too. In 1911, Henry Royce was diagnosed with bowel cancer. Immediately after, Claude Johnson moved him to London, where top specialists performed a major operation. Still, the prognosis was grim, and the doctors gave Henry just 3 months to live. However, Johnson believed they were being pessimistic, and as soon as Henry showed signs of recovery, he relocated him to Overstrand, a quiet Norfolk village by the sea, hoping the fresh air would aid his recuperation. He then appointed a nurse to oversee Henry's care, who even accompanied him in search of warmer climates, from France to Italy and even to Egypt during the winters. Despite his fragile health, Royce continued refining the design and engineering of the Silver Ghost, even from his bed. Miraculously, he slowly regained his strength, and by 1912, Henry was back at the Rolls-Royce factory, fresh and ready to work again. His timing couldn't have been better, as the world was heading toward an economic collapse. In 1914, World War I erupted, and expensive cars like Rolls-Royce became the last thing people needed. Sales plummeted, and the company was forced to lay off workers to survive. But as the war continued to escalate, Henry saw an opportunity. Recognizing the military's need for reliable, high-performance vehicles, Rolls-Royce collaborated with the British Army to supply over 100 Silver Ghost chassis and engines, which were then converted into ambulances and armored vehicles. Some even fitted the revolving machine guns. These vehicles proved highly effective thanks to their consistent performance in extreme conditions. Still, that wasn't enough to save the company entirely. Fortunately, the reputation for excellence led to a greater opportunity. Until then, the British government had relied heavily on French manufacturers for aircraft engines. So, they approached Henry to design and produce a British engine, originally based around the Silver Ghost. Initially, Henry refused, believing it was impossible, but with the company on the brink of collapse, he accepted the offer. Over the next year, Henry and his team worked tirelessly from his home, often to the detriment of his health, and by 1915, they had completed a 12-cylinder masterpiece that exceeded all expectations, the Rolls-Royce Eagle. The Eagle was lighter, more reliable, and more fuel-efficient than any on the market. During the next years, Rolls-Royce supplied thousands of aircraft engines to the British Army, giving them a significant advantage in aerial combat and playing a crucial role in the Allies' victory during World War I. Thanks to Henry's engineering, his company not only survived the war, but came out stronger than before, allowing it to gain a strong foothold in the aviation industry. In fact, by the late 1920s, aircraft engines made up the majority of Rolls-Royce's business. Meanwhile, demand for their cars also surged post-war, creating a 3-year production backlog by 1921. To meet demand, Rolls-Royce opened a new factory in Springfield, Massachusetts, from which nearly 3,000 cars were produced over the next decade. However, with rising competition from high-end brands such as Bentley, Cadillac, and Hispano-Suiza, Rolls-Royce needed a striking new model to maintain its dominance. So, Henry got to work on a new car, one that would transform Rolls-Royce into one of the most luxurious car manufacturers in the world. In 1925, Rolls-Royce unveiled the successor to the Silver Ghost, the Phantom 1. Designed for cutting-edge luxury and performance, the Phantom had a larger engine than its predecessor, with four-wheel brakes and better chassis, suspension, and steering. It also reached a top speed of 90 miles per hour, an impressive feat at the time. The Phantom 1 was an instant success and shifted the public perception of Rolls-Royce from reliable to luxurious. This prompted Henry to improve the car even further, resulting in the Phantom 2 in 1929, which also became well received. But then came the Great Depression. The global economy collapsed and many car makers suffered financial ruin. Fortunately, Henry had already introduced a more affordable vehicle by then, the Rolls-Royce 2025, which proved to be very popular and became its best-selling model during the interwar years. Thanks to this, Rolls-Royce managed to survive the Great Depression and even acquire one of its main competitor, Bentley Motors, which went bankrupt in 1931. After discontinuing its models and liquidating all remaining assets, Bentley was moved to the Rolls-Royce factory in Derby, where both brands began sharing chassis and engines to produce its cars for the next 70 years. 2 years later, Rolls-Royce released a new model, the Bentley 3.5-liter, which proved to be an immediate success. Marketed as the silent sports car, its efficient blend of effortless power and style led many to consider it one of the finest cars of its era, even impressing Bentley's founder himself. Sadly, Henry Royce was no longer there to witness its launch. The long years of excessive work and poor lifestyle habits had finally taken its toll, and by 1933, at the age of 70, Henry was forced to remain bedridden. Yet, even as his body failed, he never stopped working. On the eve of his death, he sketched an adjustable shock absorber designed for an upcoming model and ordered it sent to the factory. By the time his drawing arrived the next morning, Henry Royce had passed away. Despite his death, the company continued enjoying success, and by 1936, the last model Henry worked on was finally launched, the Phantom 3. The Phantom 3 was the first Rolls-Royce to feature a V12 engine, providing a smooth, powerful performance so refined that passengers could barely tell the engine was running. It was the most technically advanced luxury car in the world, and only the most popular among royalty and the social elite could afford it, as the chassis and engine alone costed the price of 6 average houses at the time. While the Phantom 3 helped boost Rolls-Royce's prominence, its production was discontinued only 3 years later. World War II had erupted, and the war and its aftermath would bring Rolls-Royce with new challenges that would redefine the company once again. With the outbreak of the Second World War, Rolls-Royce halted its car production entirely and focused solely on manufacturing its Merlin aircraft engines for the war effort. Initially developed in 1933, the Merlin was plagued by early reliability issues, but after years of refinements and new design iterations, it became one of the most powerful and dependable aero engines of its time. The Merlin would power some of the war's most iconic fighter aircrafts, including the Spitfire, the Hurricane, and the Mustang, playing a crucial role in the Allied victory once more. By 1945, Rolls-Royce had produced over 160,000 Merlin engines in 52 variations, cementing its reputation as one of the best aircraft engine manufacturers in the world. After the war, Rolls-Royce resumed to car production. But the world had changed, and so had the automotive industry. Mass production techniques, refined during the war, now dictated new standards, making fully assembled cars essential to accommodate the post-war market. And until this point, Rolls-Royce had only manufactured chassis and engines, leaving the bodywork to independent coach builders who tailored each design to individual buyers. As a result, Rolls-Royce introduced the Silver Dawn in 1949, the first model to feature in-house bodywork. It was then followed by the Silver Cloud in 1955, which achieved greater sales thanks to its efficient blend of luxury with modern designs. On the other hand, Bentley cars were also made with bodies virtually identical to Rolls-Royce's, the only differences being the radiator grille and emblem. As the company refined its manufacturing approach, it leaned further into ultra-luxury, introducing features such as electric razors and cigar humidors to its cars. This prestige culminated in the Silver Shadow, launched in the mid-1960s. With over 34,000 units sold between 1965 and 1980, it became Rolls-Royce's best-selling model in history. But with growth also came overreach, and Rolls-Royce was about to fall victim to its own ambition. In the late 1960s, Rolls-Royce sought to dominate the aviation market, entering fierce competition with General Electric. This led them to partner with Lockheed Aircraft Corporation to develop the RB211, a revolutionary jet engine design that was intended to be lighter, more powerful, and more fuel efficient than its rivals. But technical hurdles soon emerged. The engine suffered from excess fuel consumption, oil leaks, and repeated failures of its carbon fiber fan blades under stress. These setbacks forced engineers to go back to the drawing board multiple times, pushing the company's costs to its limit. By February 1971, Rolls-Royce was drowning in over £200 million of debt, nearly double of what they anticipated. Shortly after, they declared bankruptcy. The news took everyone by surprise, especially the British government, which recognized its strategic and defense importance. So, it was declared a national emergency, and the government quickly intervened to nationalize the aerospace division while splitting off Rolls-Royce car division in 1973. The restructuring allowed the Rolls-Royce to eventually complete the RB211, which would go on to become widely successful. In fact, it was thanks to this engine that Rolls-Royce became a world leader in the aero engine industry, supplying engines for major commercial aircrafts such as the Airbus 320 and the Boeing 747. Meanwhile, Rolls-Royce Motors was acquired by Vickers in 1980, but struggled to maintain profitability over the following years. So, in 1998, they sold the company to Volkswagen, which at the time was acquiring several failing car brands. However, this is where things got complicated. While Volkswagen now owned Bentley, the Rolls-Royce factory, and the rights to the Parthenon Grill and Spirit of Ecstasy, it didn't have the rights to the Rolls-Royce name and logo. Those rights were acquired by BMW shortly after, meaning Volkswagen could build Rolls-Royce cars but not call them Rolls-Royce, while BMW could build cars named Rolls-Royce but without the signature design elements. The two companies eventually came to a settlement, and in 2003, BMW gained full control of Rolls-Royce Motors cars, while Volkswagen retained ownership of Bentley, finally splitting both car companies and moving towards their own directions and designs. That same year, Rolls-Royce opened a new factory in Goodwood, England, and launched the Phantom 7. With a recommitment to giving more power, the Phantom 7 came with a 6.8-liter V12 engine, capable of accelerating the nearly 3-ton vehicle from 0 to 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds. The car was also highly customizable, making it even more special. Clients could choose any exterior and interior color, plus a vast array of premium materials. This bespoke approach became a Rolls-Royce hallmark, helping it dominate the ultra-luxury market. Following its strong comeback, the company expanded the Phantom line and introduced new models like the Ghost, the Wraith, and the Dawn. In 2018, it released the Cullinan, its first SUV, and now its best-selling vehicle. But in 2024, Rolls-Royce launched its most exclusive and bespoke model yet, La Rose Noire Droptail, becoming the most expensive new car of all time with a staggering price of $30 million. Today, Rolls-Royce sells around 6,000 vehicles annually. Meanwhile, its aerospace division remains one of the world's premier aircraft engine suppliers, with a market cap exceeding $84 billion. This is the story of how a poor newspaper boy who could barely afford to eat created the most luxurious car brand in the world, Rolls-Royce.